the tools and the knowledge you need to be successful. We've been pretty busy. There's a lot that's been going on. It's been a while since we've done one of these things, but as you'll see throughout and towards the end, there's a lot of work that we're doing to kind of get the word out, to help you guys as customers and as users know as much as you can and be as effective as you can. I'm coming to you from Florida, where it's way too early and way too cold. I think this morning it dipped below 70, and that just makes me uncomfortable. So with that being said, in case you don't know who I am, my name's Corey. I'm the guy that runs Learn On Demand Systems. I also function as the primary architect for all our systems and solutions. And we've got a pretty big team of folks now, well over 100 people that are helping to build these platforms, deliver them, and support them out to you. And so what we're going to take a look at this morning and over the next 2 days is some of the newer features and some of the practices and some of the capabilities and how you can actually go in and build compelling lab content and also operate and deliver that content through the other tools and platforms we have, such as our LMS. Now, want to point out that we do have some prizes to give away. If you want to enter into any one of these contests, all you need to do is take a picture, send it out on social media, and you could win. Our folks are going to be monitoring all these sessions all day long, monitoring all these channels. So take the picture, send it out there, and you could win a prize. So the format for this particular event, this event's a little bit different. In the past, when we've done these, we've kind of live streamed over 2 days, usually from a studio. We'd get everyone together, we'd all go to a studio, and we do this. Obviously, that's not that feasible these days. So this is a new format of an event that we're trying out. We'd love your feedback on it. We've got events running for about the next 2 days. Some of the sessions are repeated, so you can catch those. They're all being recorded. You can listen to them after the fact, share them, use them, whatever helps you. And then we're also running this through our TMS and taking advantage of some of the capabilities. And so the reason we do that is so that you can see that you can also do things like this through the TMS. One of the things we're going to talk about briefly here in a second is how training has changed and some of the ways that customers are being a little more innovative in the way they deliver training. And this format that we're doing for this event is the type of format that a lot of people are starting to adopt. And our TMS supports doing a delivery in this type of format when you pair it with something like a meeting platform like Teams or Zoom or whatever it is you might be working with. So you have your agenda. Go to workshop.learnondemand.net, log in on your My Training page. You can scroll through. You can see the calendar invites, add them to your calendar. The meeting links will all be posted and be available there. Here's the basic schedule real quick. I'm not going to read the schedule to you, but a lot of different topics going on. Most of these sessions are around helping empower you to build and deliver content more quickly and more easily. One of the things that we're guilty of, and we recognize it, is we build a platform that has a lot of capabilities. It's not easy to go in there and start from scratch, build learning content, and then get that learning content out in front of students and learners. We're going through a pretty significant effort. I'm going to show you some of the ways that we're doing this over the next little bit to simplify that process so that when you want to go in and build a lab, whether it's a lab for training, whether it's a lab for some form of skills assessment, whether it's a lab for an exam or a test in a PBT scenario, that you can actually do this far quicker than you ever could in the past. Some of the new capabilities we've released, things like templates. Some new lab scenarios we're going to talk about, things like how to build labs that are focused on developers that don't need complex infrastructure like Visual Studio, Windows, etc. So first day, second day, you can see the repeat sessions. And the thing I do want to kind of point out are the networking groups. This is a new thing that we're doing for this particular session, and we're leveraging capabilities that exist directly in our TMS. You can sign up for any of these networking groups throughout the entire duration of the event. We're going to have staff that are in these networking groups and are able to answer questions, help direct you. You can talk to other customers, talk to other attendees. These groups are available 24/7. Go in there anytime, take a look at them, check them out, see what you think, give us some feedback. These networking groups are a new thing we've added, and we'd like to see you guys go in, take advantage, and again, give us some feedback on how they work for you so we can improve it for next time. So with that being said, what sorts of things are people doing today? We're going to jump right in. When you think of learn on demand systems, most of the time, and in particular the lab on demand platform, most of the time, the primary use case that comes to mind is training. Training is still the primary use case, but in the past year, we've seen a tremendous amount of labs being created for scenarios that are not necessarily directly training. And we've also seen people start to expand the way they're using the platforms in some different directions, right? Our bread and butter for decades was instructor-led training in classrooms. Over the past 5 years, we've begun to see a migration away from instructor-led to on-demand, self-paced, and to virtual. We're now starting to see a further migration to these newer training formats. Think of training formats that are not necessarily bound by a clock, but are still bound by a group. So what I mean is, you have a class, right? The class, instead of having 10 students, which is the typical, 10, maybe 20, which is typically how many you could fit in a classroom, a class might now have 200 students. Instead of 1 instructor, you might have 15 instructors, with each instructor having a specialty. Instead of 5 days over a week, the class might be run 2 hours on a Monday, 3 hours on a Tuesday, 5 hours on a Wednesday, and then 1 hour for the next 3 weeks, giving you this additional level of flexibility. And what our customers are doing in the training space is they're now trying to model the consumption of training around the new reality that a lot of people work in. Work from home is more predominant, flexible work schedules are more predominant. So they're building training programs and solutions that adapt well in those environments. This particular event serves as an example of a way that you can do that. How you can mix delivery types, you can mix live presentations with repeats and recordings. You can mix live with on-demand in the future, and you can incorporate in things like collaborative sessions like the networking groups. The next scenario that's getting a lot of traction is skills validation and skills assessment. Now, if you kind of compare number 2 and number 4, performance-based testing, there's a lot of similarities. They all boil down to creating an environment or a lab that involves some element of scoring, whether it's multiple choice questions, whether it's automated scripts, whether it's where you've got to do research and type the answer to a question like a database query or something of that nature, or whether it's writing a piece of code and having a series of unit tests running against the code to validate the code works. Skills assessment is becoming one of the dominant use cases for hands-on learning. Now, skills assessment, we can apply that a couple of different ways. Recruiting, for example, pre-assessment, post-assessment for training, and then finally the big one, which is performance-based testing, where you're taking the certification exam, and the certification exam has a lab in it. Another use case that's becoming popular is help desk. Now, this is one of the non-training use cases where customers are building a lot of lab content. Here's the primary scenario that we're seeing people do. Someone opens a help desk ticket about a piece of software, and the help desk tech has access to a library of lab environments that represent all the ways the software can be configured, so that when they're working with the person on the phone, they're looking in real time at a comparable environment. And in some cases, what some of these customers that are using labs for help desk are doing is they're actually working with their bigger customers to create lab environments that represent the actual customer implementation to further expedite resolving support tickets, working through issues, etc. And then they're further taking that and saying, okay, we get a support ticket that comes in, and we can reproduce the support ticket in the lab environment. We can turn around and hand that lab environment to our engineering team, and they can develop the fix right there in the lab environment, right? There's never an element of training involved, but they're using a lab through the entire life cycle of customer support. It's a use case that we're seeing become more and more and more popular. So again, think outside the box. Another one that we're seeing a lot of demand for is group projects. As you take away the physical interaction of a classroom, we've got to find ways to get students to work together and collaborate, and group projects are a way that that's being done. Now, how we support that on the lab front, and there's a number of sessions through the next couple of days that cover some of these topics, are with shared labs and shared instances. A shared lab is when two students can work on the same lab at the same time. A shared instance is when I can do some work on the lab and I can then turn around and give that to someone else that's in my class, or someone else I've been assigned to, either synchronously or asynchronously, where I'll work on it today and you work on it tomorrow, to help build an entire solution. So imagine a scenario where I've got to work on a project with a team to build and deploy a website that contains a database. My role might be the database administrator. So the person who's playing the role of the developer does the initial website, assigns me the lab. I go in and configure the database. I then assign the lab off to the person who's going to configure the deployment, for example. As more and more colleges and universities are going virtual, we're seeing a huge uptick in API-based integrations with commercial LMS platforms. And these are using either typically LTI, which we are LTI 1.3 certified, or our own native API. And then finally, we're seeing a lot of people put a lot of time into customizing the delivery experience. We're going to talk about some of the things we're working on that front as we work through the topics. And what I mean by heavy customization is kind of twofold. Number one, they're being very particular about the look and feel of the lab environment. You can use cascading style sheets, CSS documents, to completely transform the UI that your student takes and make it look exactly like, for example, your website, your font, your graphics, your color schemes, your everything. And we're seeing customers to put a lot of effort into building out these highly customized themes so that the lab experience completely integrates with their existing look and feel and almost becomes just a natural extension of the fact that that the person that's on their website, taking a course, taking a lab is being dropped into what is effectively a third-party platform, our platform, becomes 100% transparent to them. So just some basic examples of what we're seeing, the trends we're seeing with folks that are building and delivering content using our tools. Now, what have we been doing? Well, this is a small list, and these are the things that I didn't have time to cover. But to kind of give you a sense of where the work's been done, especially in the last, what we'll say is 6 to 9 months. The list you have on the left is our TMS, our training management system. It's multilingual. I believe there's, someone may have to correct me on the exact number, but about 10 languages that we support. We've recently released an entire email notification system allowing you to build custom notification plans. Now imagine a system whereby you can have emails go out to customers at various times during their experience, whether it's when they're enrolled, 2 days before an event, after an event, in the middle of an event, when they're first signed up a month beforehand. You can control all this, define your own templates, define your messages, and the system will take care of doing all the notifications for you. We've added some additional tools for instructors. Instructors can now manually control what elements of a course are available to which students. What's interesting about this is they can now define different experiences for different students that are enrolled in the same classes. So two people enroll in a security class, for example, and I'm going to give one person all the Linux content, one person all the Windows content, and then expect them to collaborate together. We've also automated some of the work around managing larger classes using waitlisting technology. On the lab on demand side, IDLX, which is the language that you write your lab manual in, we've done a tremendous amount of work in there to make an even more dynamic experience. Ideally, when a student opens a lab experience and they look at the documentation, that documentation should be effectively custom to them, custom to their environment, to their experience, to the things that they have to work with, and give you the ability as the author to inject information in real time into the document so that you can tweak and tune and customize the experience And the work we've done in IDLX has enabled a lot of that. For example, variables and dynamic includes. We've become LTI Advantage Compete certified. We've done a lot of work on the back end to speed up the process of launching more complex labs. We now have additional logic around, more tasks to run in parallel. If a lab incorporates multiple fabrics, it's for example, both Hyper-V and Azure, for example, we can do a lot of these things in parallel. We've done substantial upgrades to our instructor monitoring tools. You now have multiple views. You can see mouse movements in real time, and we've extended the instructor monitoring to include also cloud-based lab environments. So for example, things that run in Azure and Amazon now inherit instructor monitoring. One of the cool things they've introduced in the last couple of months is something called multi-instance labs. In the past, a student was not able to start the same lab at the same time. So if I have a lab, I could only run one copy of that lab at a time. Now, as a student, if it's enabled, you can run multiple copies of the same lab, and you can name those different instances. For example, let's say that I give you a lab environment that where I want you to configure a solution to a problem. You could actually start that lab twice at the same time and have configuration A and configuration B running in parallel. We've added lab sharing and lab assignment. This ties back to what I had mentioned earlier in one of the patterns. Now, as a student, you can actually assign your lab to another student or share your lab with another student. So instead of the instructor being the only person that can view your desktop, I can actually let another person in my class look at my lab in real time with me, or I can give them my lab and they now inherit complete control of it and I lose access to it. So a lot of work's been done, a lot of cool new tools, a lot of cool new features. I do want to take some time though and dive into some of these. And in particular, kind of talk about some of the new authoring and learning experiences that we're enabling for folks. So without further ado, we'll jump in and take a look at some of the things that we're doing. So the first one is one I call Labs for Coders. So you may have in the past, I'm going to flick over to my got a lot of windows open here in the back end. Let me find the right one. There it is right here. So you may have in the past seen this lab that we've kind of shown. We've shown a demo of this lab a couple of times. This is it's a simple lab. It uses a Docker container on the back end. The Docker container is running Visual Studio Code. There's a company that went out and they took Visual Studio Code and they turned it into basically they web enabled it, right? So this is a Docker container. It's running a web server and it's presenting Visual Studio Code basically in a web browser. And so we took this and said, okay, we can take this and we can do kind of some fun things with this. So I've got a leap year calculator in here. All right, I've got a little C# project. And I've got a little challenge, right? Can I write the code to run a leap year? And if I come over here, I can run some tests. It'll actually do some scripting work on the back end. It'll go in, it'll check to see if my code actually works. And you'll see here that my code actually doesn't work because I haven't written any code. And then we can incorporate some of the, the cool things that IDLX enables us to do, like code blocks, and that our activity-based assessments enable us to do, like actions, and we can inject some fixed code, right? So it actually goes in and writes the code into the platform, and then we can check it again, and we'll see that now it actually works properly. And so we did this, and this was kind of cool, but and so why would you care about this? Well, this type of a lab enables you to test a person's ability to learn syntax or provide the ability to learn syntax and also provide the ability to learn basic coding concepts like conditional logic, loops, if statements, all these sorts of things. Most developer training is focused on the infrastructure required for developers to operate. So things like, can you set up Visual Studio? Can I set up a website? Can I take a pre-written piece of code and push it to the website? That's what most developer training is. But there is a pretty big demand out there for developer training that's focused on learning how to actually write the code. And so we've been focused on that for a little while, and this was the first prototype that we did. And so we took this concept in the last couple of months and we've been working on it. And I want to show you the new version of this. Now, this is not released yet. This is going to come out in, I would imagine, sometime in third quarter. But let's take a quick look. So here's the new version of what a code lab looks like. So we're going to launch it. Give it just, this one's running on a test server on the back end. And so we can see we've now got a similar UI, but it's a lot simpler. We've got a code editor window. The code editor window supports multiple languages. Right now it supports 6 languages. Our thinking is that we're going to support somewhere in the range of 20 to 40 languages when we finally release this. And I can actually switch between languages, and you'll see that the actual stub code will change. Not changing for me for some reason. I'm going to start this one again. There we go. So we can actually see the stub code on the back end changes. All right, so here's PHP, here's Python. And the other thing I want you to notice is if I look over here, right, so I've got a little hint. So I want you to do the same leap year challenge as a little hint. As I change the code, notice the hint changes. So there's direct integration between the code editing, the code writing area, and the documentation that's been provided. All right, so let's just do a sample here. We'll use the language Go. I'm going to go to the next page. Here's the tests that we're going to run. So we've got the challenge. Can you write a lab using some code? Here's how we're going to validate it. And as I change my language, you'll see that the sample solution also changes. So there's integration between the code environment and integration between the language. So we'll take Java. I'm just going to throw this code sample in here, and I'm going to run it. And you'll see that when I run it, it's going to go out there. It's going to compile the code. It's going to run the code. It's going to run the series of tests against the code. And it's going to give you back the results of those tests. And you can see that it ran 3 tests, and all 3 tests came back correct. Here's the output from the Java execution engine. You can see how long it actually took to run the code and any errors that occurred. Now, if I come in here and just break this by injecting a bunch of random stuff, I'm going to submit it again, and you'll see that now, because there's errors in the code, it'll actually give me error output. And as a developer, I can now use this error output to go in and figure out, well, what I did wrong. Well, clearly I put a bunch of random characters in the code. Point being, this is a new type of lab. It's a new type of lab UI, one that we're going to be rolling out, as I said, in the next couple of months to full production. Right now, we've got a version of this that we're using internally, working the kinks out, working the bugs out, expanding the capabilities. And we're going to be releasing this coming up soon. Now, when we release it, a few things that are going to be different. Number one, the UI is going to be a little bit prettier. Number two, right now, all the tests are effectively hard-coded. Right, so you can't go in as a lab author and create your own tests. You have to predefine them. You're going to be able to, as a student that's in here, define your own tests you want to run, enter your own input and expected output values so you can validate the code works. And then as an author, you can create a series of predefined tests that represent the ability to score the code. Now, this is a different use case. This is using structures like functions to teach someone syntax and logic. The second version of this, which we're hoping is going to be out before the end of the year, we're going to include integrations with things like servers so you can actually run deployment scenarios. So in the case of PHP, I could write a series of PHP code and then actually deploy that to a server and view the result of the code by rendering the web page the code is designed to produce. So there's an element of server deployment that's going to be pushed into this as well. So pretty excited about this. It's a whole new set of content and set of topics that we're enabling you to build content around. The second one is what we're calling experiential documents. Now, this is all another way that we want you to creatively think about how you deliver lab content. Now, for this one, I've got a lab running here somewhere, I think. There we go. I did cancel it, so I'm going to have to start this one up again. And so what I'm going to do here is start up 2. And so that one's running right there. This other guy should start up here in the background. That one takes about a minute. So while that one's starting in the background, here's kind of where we're going with this. This is a lab that we have. This one's using a Docker container on the back end running Linux, and we've actually got a terminal session into that Docker container. So this is a standard Linux terminal session. What we're enabling you to do now is completely change the way you interact with the document. So right now I've got the experience area, right, the actual part I interact with on the right hand side, and this is kind of the big focal point of the lab. The document is smaller and off to the right. And I'm essentially meant to, primarily work in the lab environment, and the document is, supporting instructions, etc. I think the screen sharing is messing a little bit. There we go. My mouse keeps changing a little bit on me. And so I've got all my instructions. Well, we're going to kind of flip this around, and we're going to embed the instructions, embed the experience, embed the lab console directly into the manual. Let's see if this other guy is ready. Here he is right here. So this is a Windows virtual machine. We'll do this one first. I'm going to go ahead and log on to it. And you'll see this is a standard Windows virtual machine, and I've got just some basic instructions over here. I've got some things loading up here in the background. So let's take this guy and let's kind of flip him around, then we'll come back and we'll flip around the console. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go back and just edit the properties of that lab. Too many windows, I'm losing track of where it is. There we go. So here's the lab that I've got running in the background right now. I'm going to go edit the lab profile. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I don't want any of these virtual machines to be visible to the student. So I'm going to turn those off. I'm going to save it. Now, as soon as that happens, I'm going to come out here and just refresh my window. Actually, I'm going to close it and open it again. You'll see that the lab now changes. This is the same lab I just had, but the consoles are gone. All I'm left with is a document. The consoles are still there. They're just not visible. Watch what I'm going to do. We're going to edit my instructions. I'm just going to park this guy over here, park this guy over here, and I'm going to use some new syntax that we've added to IDLX. Virtual machine server 1 dot console. And look what this is going to do. It's going to embed the console directly into the lab manual itself. Now, this is a live console. I can work with it. I can open tools. Services. I can break the lab. This is a little script. You can see that it's fully interactive. All this script does is, goes in and breaks the lab environment, right? So it's now broken, and all I did in this particular example was I stopped the print spooler service. So print spooler is down here somewhere. It's right here. Let's refresh the view. Print spooler is turned off, and I can now do the exact same scoring activities that I could do with any other virtual machine. We'll fix it, check our fix, and it's now running again. So let's take a quick look at how that looks with this other guy. So this one here doesn't use a traditional RDP type connection. It uses an HTML console connection. We can do the exact same thing. I've got a little instruction here to run a simple command. Well, let's kind of flip this around a little bit, and instead of having you go to the window to run the actual command, we're going to find that line right there. Here it is right here. And we're going to inject a terminal line directly under it. And we're going to make that terminal one line. where I can run that command. It's actually running that command now directly in that terminal, in that single line. Now, this is a bit of an extreme example. Number one, I've left the bigger console visible. We could turn that off the same way by saying it's not visible. And if I was interested in viewing the output of that command instead of just running it, I could make this any number of lines. All right, maybe I want to make it 10. So I've got a better view of the output that's in there. Point being, this is the exact same fully interactive terminal that you have in the larger lab window that I can now embed as many times as I want and in as many places as I want throughout the entire lab manual. So now you get this notion of, instead of a lab being focused on the interactive part of it, the lab can now be focused on a longer, more elaborate document with small bits of experience sprinkled throughout it at the appropriate times. And those experiences have the exact same capabilities of a larger lab environment. So we're going to go ahead and just kind of close these guys down and take a quick look at our next one. So the next thing that we've done, and this is one that we're particularly excited about, and we've been working on for a number of months now, is the notion of what we call our template gallery. So two big changes that you're going to see coming down the pipe in the next couple of weeks. One of them is we've switched around the layout in Lab on Demand, and we've introduced this idea of a dashboard. Now, the dashboard right now looks like the old My Labs page, but we have some pretty big plans for this. This dashboard is going to become your central hub for everything you have in Lab on Demand. The things you use most often, the tools you use most often, links to help, ways to interact with the community. There's big plans for what's going to go on this page. The first one of those is we've changed the way that you create lab profiles. Now, when I click Create Lab Profile, I don't have to create a series in a virtual machine and a cloud slice and a subscription. I can now pick from a pre-configured lab environment that represents the environment that I maybe want to work in. One of the things we've observed is that most people that build labs, there's only about 40 or 50 combinations of things that people use. You know, a couple of virtual machines, a couple of operating systems, a link to Azure, a link to Amazon, etc. And we can vastly simplify your ability to create a lab by packaging all those common configurations into these templates. So you come in, you browse through the template library, you can search by topic area, you can search by technologies. There's a template library that is public that everyone has access to within an organization. You can build your own template library that's private for you. Point being, you come in, you scan the library, you find one that looks about right, you can preview it, which I've done, and this preview is loading in the background here somewhere. Right, so when that one finishes, you'll see this is just a virtual machine. And once I'm happy that the preview contains the elements that I want, this one has Windows 10 with Visual Studio Code pre-installed. It's also going to include, I'm going to let this one start in the background while I'm looking at it, a series of instructions, how you can customize the template, right? So there's embedded documentation. And then towards the end, how would you want to use this? What's the use case, right? Are you doing this for automation? Are you doing this to build a scored environment? Are you doing this to build a shared environment? If you're building a scored environment, for example, you can choose that option, and it gives you the guidance on how to go in and actually create all the scoring scripts that work in this environment. So not only is it a sample environment to get you started, there's a lot of embedded instructions and samples within the documentation. So if I'm happy with this and I go, you know what, this looks about right, cool, I'm going to end this. I just come in here and click Create New Lab, and we've got an incredibly simplified lab creation screen. 002 from template 2, a series. I'm going to create a new series, call it templates. Actually, that's not a good name. Let's call it code training. Some basic configuration options. Now, remember how simple this screen is right now. I'm going to show you what we're doing this in a couple of minutes. Hit done, and now it takes me to that lab. So I've taken that exact template, and I now have a brand new lab profile. It's created from that template, so I know where it came from. And even if I edit the instructions, you'll see it brought in all the sample instructions as well. So we've gone from needing about 75 clicks to build this to about 3 or 4 clicks to build this. So, you know, we obviously want your feedback. What templates work? What templates would you like to see, not like to see, so that this template library enables you to go from 0 to a functional lab in minutes rather than multiple hours. So pretty excited about the templates. This notion of templates, by the way, you're going to start seeing in a lot of places through the platform. Those of us that use the TMS, for example, we're going to start introducing template classes and template courses. So for example, if you have a class, you want to schedule a 5-day course, you could simply drag the course to the 5-day course template, and it'll configure everything you need already. So this notion of templates as being an easy way to create things is something that's going to become very pervasive over the next couple of quarters. The next one, and this is going to play into something we're going to talk about here in a few minutes, dynamic challenges and activities. So I'm going to pull that one up real quick. So as we've done work on scoring labs, we wanted to make your ability to score labs in a more dynamic way better. And specifically, we wanted you to be able to vary the way that you present scoring content. Now, the concept behind this is really, really simple. I'm going to start up what is effectively a really dumb lab. It's a bunch of simple math questions, but I want you to pay attention to a couple of quick things that I'm going to show you. The first one here is this topic is 5 questions, but there's one scoring button. In the past, there'd be a scoring button for all 5 items, and that's configurable. So I can score these 5 items effectively as a single scoring point versus individually scoring them. The second one is, and here I want you to pay attention in particular to 10 plus 10, 9 plus 9. This is a bank of questions. There's 5 questions in here, and you'll see this in a second. It's only presenting 2. I'm going to end this lab real quick. Go to the end and submit it. It's going to tell me I failed because I didn't click any buttons. But I'm going to launch it again. Now remember, we had 10 plus 10, 9 plus 9. Let's go back to that same screen. We now have 6 plus 6, 8 plus 8. So you can create banks of challenges, right? These can be questions, but this can also be scoring scripts. So for example, in my the little example I showed you with the experiential document, I was starting the Prince Schooler service. If the test is, or the skill is, can you identify a broken service and start it? I could have 5 of these with 5 different services. And the 5 different people who launched that lab, they're all being evaluated on the same skill, which is, can you start a service? But the service they're actually asked to troubleshoot and identify can be different for every single person. So now, as you begin building challenges and performance-based testing items, you don't need dozens of labs to represent all the combinations of questions and topics you might want to test on. You can have one lab and use this notion of an activity group to change the way that items are presented. If I edit the instructions on this, and we're not going to go into this in depth, you'll see that there's some new UI in here. We have a group, and the group itself has some rules on it. So this is a very simple activity group. This second one here, randomized display 2, you can see I've got some simple property pages. Display only 2 of the activities and make them random. So it's very simple to use. And again, I can come in here, add a new question, and you can see that this question can be any topic that I want, any type that I want. I can add a new group, right? And just create the new group as I go. I can sort these up and down. I can change the order that they're presented in. So you can certainly come in, again, very easy to do, quick and simple to have a play with. The next one here that we're going to talk about briefly is called the Azure Virtual Data Center. One of the things that we've done, I'm going to spin this guy up in the background while I'm quickly talking about it. And here it is. We're going to launch this lab in the background. So while that lab is launching in the background, We're going to look at some of the properties of it. The whole notion here is that a virtual machine-based lab traditionally only ran in our data centers. You can now choose to run those virtual machine-based labs on either Azure or Amazon. What we've gone ahead and done, let me open my admin page, is we've registered every single Azure and Amazon data center in our platform. So previously we had, only our 4 data centers. Now every Azure and Amazon data center is registered in our platform as a location where you can deploy virtual machines. Now, unfortunately, it's not quite that simple, but they're there. If I want to deploy a virtual machine in one of those Azure or Amazon data centers, you create a template within Azure or Amazon, you replicate that template to the appropriate data centers, and then our team right now, we've only enabled, I think, 9 direct data centers, but we can honestly enable any of these data centers. And on the lab profile, I get to choose which of the Azure or Amazon data centers, this one here is an Azure cloud platform, that the lab is available for launching. So we've actually, for this particular lab profile, we've enabled, I think, 9 data centers. We've replicated the template image across those 9 data centers. And I've said that, okay, of those 9 data centers, we're going to allow it to launch in 4, which is East US, North Europe, South Central US, and West US. When the lab is launched, and this one here back here should be getting to about done. Find where I put it, and there it is right here. Not quite ready yet. It's actually going to geolocate to the closest of those cloud data centers based on the list that's actually been enabled. We'll let that sit and churn in the background. At the speed at which it launches varies depending on how much load. Last night it was pretty quick, a lot quicker than this. So yeah, it's running a bit long. There we go. So now if I go to my help tab, you can see this one actually launched in East US because I'm based in Florida. East US is the closest physical data center to me that's in that list of allowed data centers. So pretty powerful stuff. You get to, so again, to kind of review the process here, we've configured all Azure and all Amazon data centers, and then we've selected a group of, this is in our test environment. In here we've configured 9 of them that support VM deployment. You would, as an author, go in, create your template, and you would replicate your template across all, whatever data centers you wanted to leverage, and then come in here with your lab profile, set it to Azure, check the data centers that you made the template available, and it will now launch it as a virtual machine in Azure using whatever's closest of the available data centers. Completely transparent to the user. Everything that normally works with a local-based virtual machine also works up here. All the functionality, the documentation, type text, lab scoring, it works just as it does on one of our data centers. So those were a couple of quick demos. Show you some of the things that are available now. All this stuff I showed you, with the exception of the code labs, are available today. The code labs we're hoping to get available by now, but there's still some work to do. So those will be coming out hopefully within the next, we'll say 6 to 8 weeks. So with that, let's move on and look at some things that are coming out in Q4. Number 1, we're completely overhauling the save dialog in a lab profile. If you think about this right now as a lab author, if I have a lab running and I want to go save it, I've got a save option up here, right? If I'm using a virtual machine, which I don't actually have one running right now, no, I don't. You've got another save option over here as an author to save your diff disks. We've centralized that into one single location. So now when you choose that unified save, it's going to ask you what you want to do. And these are permission based, right? If you're a student and saves enabled, you can, it'll allow you to save your session. If you're an author, you may be able to commit your changes to your existing lab or make a brand new lab all from that one location. And when you do, we're expanding those dialogues. So remember when I had showed you the template and I created a new lab from a template, this is the new version of that dialogue that's going to get rolled out, I believe, this weekend. And you can see we're expanding what you can do. So we're taking those most common things that people configure, like RAM and processors, and simplifying those dialogues so that you can do it all directly from the lab client. In the perfect world, you can launch a template, you can do a save as on the template, and you can completely configure everything you need, disk storage, networking, RAM, without ever having to go into the admin portal of Lab on Demand and do it in there manually. That's always going to be available, but that's going to sort of become more the advanced path. This is going to be a much simpler path that uses the most commonly configured settings. So again, just a couple of other screenshots. This one here on the right that you're seeing is a lab profile. The one that's on the left is a container profile. And oh, by the way, if you save changes to the lab profile that you're currently running, and let's say you add RAM, it will actually update the instance in real time. So a little tidbit, once we roll this out, you'll be able to see that. So real proud of how that came out. I mentioned the lab authors dashboard. Right now we've kind of repositioned it and set it up. This is a mock-up of what the dashboard is eventually going to look like. Mightn't look exactly like this, but this is the concept behind it. And you're going to see a couple of diagrams like this are going to show you that are concepts. So you've got integration with our Slack channels, you've got integration with our documentation, the support tickets, all available directly from your dashboard. So the lab author dashboard is an area that we're spending quite a bit of time, again, to simplify the things that you need to do and to bring the things that you work with most often front and center. Another thing that we're rolling out, and for those of you that work in the TMS, this is going to be a big one. It's a visual designer for courses and classes. So instead of clicking endless property pages and drop-downs, you can use drag and drop to actually build out classes and build out courses, add activities, take a course, for example, and have templates for the most common types of courses people configure. So you can simply apply the template to the course. It'll set up your timings, for example, 5-day instructor-led business hours, Eastern US time, and it'll configure all the appropriate settings for you. You don't have to go in and do all the clicking. It's literally 2 or 3 clicks, you're done. This is something we're expecting to roll out in Q4. If you are interested in this, please reach out to us, talk to our product managers for the TMS. They're looking for feedback on how this lays out and the types of things people want to see in here. So if you're early on this, you can definitely influence some of the design. Another thing that's rolling out in Q4 is central authentication. This is very simple. Right now, if you use LOD, Lab on Demand, and the TMS, you need 2 user accounts. This is going to allow us to have a single unified user account that works across all platforms, and it's going to give operations managers the ability to control who in the organization has access to what tools and what roles via our customer portal. So it's going to enable seamless transition between the platforms. And one of the goals here is, today, so you can kind of see where we're going with this. The template works in LOD. So I log on to Lab on Demand. I can start creating a lab from a template. What if I was an instructor in a course, right? An instructor in a course is in the TMS. They can still launch a lab, but they wouldn't be able to save that as a new lab because they have to authenticate an LOD where they might not have an account. This central authentication model is going to enable us to take a lot of the functionality of LOD and expose that directly to TMS users so that people like instructors, for example, may be able to take a vendor provided lab, clone it and configure it as their own version and assign it to their students. Ordinarily, they'd need access to Lab on Demand to do that. With central authentication, we can start surfacing some of that functionality. A new thing that I want to sort of announce for the first time, and this is something that we can expect to roll out, I would anticipate late Q4, probably through Q1 next year, is something we're calling consumption groups. Now, this is going to radically change the way that you think about architecting the lab solution you're building. Probably one of the more significant changes that we've made in a number of years. It's based on this premise: how you consume a lab changes the experience, right? So here's some examples to put this in context. I might have one lab, and if I'm going to publish that lab on my website as a product demo, I'm not going to let people save and resume, right? And I might only want them in there for 15 minutes. If I'm going to take that same lab environment and deliver it in a class, I might allow students to save it and do it for 3 hours. Today, you would have to create 2 lab profiles. When we roll out consumption groups, you're going to have the ability to create rules that are applied based on how the lab is consumed that change the rules around what people who are consuming the lab can actually do. So in that same example, I can create one lab and I can put a rule that says if you launch this via an API, change the save and duration policy. If you launch it via the TMS in the context of a class, change the save and duration policy. If you launch it in the context of a subscription, change the save and duration policy. Now, I'm using save and duration because they're simple examples. We've identified dozens of configurable settings that can be applied in this way, right down to whether or not you display the instructions. The theme that gets applied, for example, can be modified. So here's an example of what this might look like. This rule structure is going to be hierarchical. Every organization is going to have a default rule, and this set of configuration settings will be able to be applied through multiple rules, and inheritance will dictate what the final result is. So what's the impact? You can now have one lab, and you can deliver that lab in dozens of different ways, and every one of those delivery experiences can be customized and made different. All right, so kind of let that think in for a second, right? In the past, you might need dozens of labs to accomplish that, which means your maintenance is tremendous. In this model, you can create one single lab, and through the process of using these consumption groups, have the experience come out very different for different people that are consuming that same lab. If it's going through an API to an exam provider, for example, we allow certain things and disable others. That exact same environment, if it's going through a class via the TMS, we can reverse all those configurations. One lab environment, one thing to maintain, but vastly different experiences depending on how you consume the lab. Cloning and inheritance are heavily used in LOD right now to accomplish this. This is going to hopefully all but eliminate the need for cloning and inheritance as a part of the design of a larger framework of labs in the platform. We're working on a dashboard for the TMS. This is a very early mock-up. So for those of you that are operations managers or concerned with the student experience, this is a wireframe of the one that's being developed right now. I don't have any prototypes to show you, unfortunately. We'll hope to have this in the next month or two, or a couple of months, so we can actually roll these out, get some feedback, and show you the live ones in action. But some kind of elements, you've got some tiles down the left-hand side of the screen that represents the most common things. And then on the main pages, for example, you've got calendar views that show you, as a student, all the things you've done and have coming up. As an operations manager, all the things you've got going on, for example, classes scheduled this week, and then shortcuts to all the most common things that you would work with. All right, so as an operations manager, all your enrollments and your instructors, your training keys, right there from the dashboard. There's also going to be an element of data and analytics embedded in the dashboard, so you can see historical data. For example, as an ops manager, how many students you have enrolled, how many have enrolled in the last 24 hours, just different elements like that. And again, if you're interested in this and you want to contribute, or you have particular feedback or things that are very important to you, reach out to our team. Jay Bope on our team is the product manager that's overseeing all of this. Give him the feedback. He's looking for those sorts of things to make sure that when we start building this and start rolling this out, it's got the things on there that people actually want. So early in the process, you've got a big opportunity to come in and influence this, so please do. The last thing I'm going to leave you with before we wrap up is Challenge Labs V2. So we have, over the last 2 years, rolled out our Challenge Labs product. Our Challenge Labs product is a set of scored labs that are fundamentally designed to accomplish a few things, right? Be used as pre and post-class assessments, be used for test prep, be used for skills assessment. And we have companies right now that are using Challenge Labs as part of their hiring process, to be used as the basis for PBT items. And then the most common use case right now is for vendor training, particularly the Microsoft official curriculum. They're added to the class as additional labs that the student can do because they simulate the types of exam items that PPT are going to deliver. And so it gets the student used to that goal-centric, challenge-centric style of learning that is becoming more and more common. Challenge Labs V2 is going to feature a couple things. So among, all the new features that I just showed you, things like assessment groups or activity groups, things like inline experiences, there's going to be an element of dynamic flow. So think of a logic engine where, depending on how you score on page 1, determines whether you go to page 2 or page 3. Some of you, I may be aging myself a little bit, but we've all had these kind of books we've seen as kids where, if you want to attack the wizard with the stone, jump to page 20. If you want to run and hide, jump to page 30. Think of that type of experience. As you go through the challenges, your success or failure on one particular challenge determines the next challenge that you see. Right? Maybe the next one is harder, maybe the next one is a little bit easier. And two different people going through a challenge can have two different sets of items and two different sets of tasks with varying degrees of difficulty based on how they perform and how successful that they are. Some additional things we're putting in there. We're doing a lot of work for Challenge Labs V2 around security and trustworthiness. One of the elements in here is the ability to capture screens, so that if you're doing this for a more high stakes type scenario, you can get periodic screen recordings or screen captures. A lot of data and telemetry, things like if you're on an assessment page, how long do you sit there? Do you go back and change things? Did you spend 3 minutes to answer question 1 and 30 seconds to answer question 2? What's the percentage of time someone goes in and clicks A, B? How often do they run a scoring script and have it fail? How long do the scoring scripts take to execute? There's an entire list of telemetry items we're going to start capturing, along with a log of all the activity that someone's doing. And this is, again, all for just analysis after the fact so that we can evaluate how effective these are. We're going to be basing them on templates. And the cool thing here is you get access to the templates. And then finally, there's going to be both a study mode and an exam mode in Challenge Labs V2. The study mode will give you more feedback. It'll give you more tries. The exam mode is a little more hardcore. You can't go back and change things. You've got limited time. You don't get as much feedback. You just get the score report at the end. Challenge Labs V2 is something we're looking to roll out in Q4, so you can expect to start seeing that. And when you combine that with some of the new content capabilities around code, for example, some of the topic areas for Challenge Labs V2 are going to be, not the traditional topic areas that we focused on before. We're going to be focused on things like big data, data science, machine learning, AI, scripting, coding, using that new code editor UI that I showed you in the beginning. So that's a lot. How do you keep up? Well, we've got a very, very robust training schedule that we're putting out. First of all, every week we're doing feature overviews and demos. These are quick, about 25-minute little demos. They're 100% demo. Every week we pick sort of a new feature that we rolled out and we walk you through it in detail. There's a lot of these already recorded. LODS.1/overview. You can see the library, you can see the schedule, you can view the past recordings. Every month we have a free lab developer workshop. Think of this as a deep dive into some of these particular topics. And then quarterly, we do one of these events right here. So every quarter I'll come up, I'll kind of highlight the new things we're working on, and then the team is going to come behind me and they're going to deep dive on all these topics. And then finally, we have feature demos on Thursdays. Feature demos dive into individual product features. Just so they pick a product feature and they just go highly deep on it, show you all the things you can do, how it works, etc. And again, you can go to that website, you can register. You can also view the recordings. We've already done a number of these in the past couple of months, so there's a pretty good library there right now. And then finally, next session begins. I ran a little bit over, sorry about that. But next session begins 8:30 Eastern. LODS to one feedback. Please share your feedback and post a pic on social media for us. So with that, I appreciate the time. Thanks very much. Hopefully this was interesting. And if it was so interesting you want to hear it again, we're doing this one again in a couple hours time. So thanks and have a great day.